I won't sell him to you, Elena whispered, her voice cracking as she held the reins tighter. He's all I have left. The stranger's weathered face darkened beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his calloused fingers slowly closing around the gold coins in his palm. Ma'am, that horse is dying. 3 days, maybe 4 if you're lucky. But you see, sometimes the most desperate moments in our lives lead us to the most extraordinary discoveries. And what Elena couldn't have known in that dusty street in Redemption Creek was that this dying horse and this mysterious cowboy with pockets full of gold would change everything she thought she knew about miracles, love, and second chances. Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small, heartfelt favor to ask. Please subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes all the difference. Let me take you back to where it all began, 3 weeks before that fateful encounter, when Elena Mitchell first arrived in this godforsaken frontier town with nothing but a sick horse, a broken heart, and a secret that could destroy everything she was trying to build. Elena had been running for 47 days when her mare, Rosemary, first stumbled. The letter that brought her west from Boston, promising marriage to a kind rancher named Thomas Hartford, had been nothing but lies. There was no Thomas Hartford, no ranch, no future waiting for her in Redemption Creek. Just dust, disappointment, and a dying horse. But sometimes, dear friends, what appears to be our greatest misfortune becomes the doorway to our most incredible blessing. Because that stranger with his mysterious gold and his impossible offer was about to prove that in the Wild West, miracles still happened, even when everything seemed lost. The dying horse would live. The stranger would reveal secrets that defied explanation. And Elena would discover that sometimes, when you lose everything, you finally find what you were truly meant to have. What Elena didn't know that morning was that the man offering gold for her dying horse had been watching her for 3 days. And what he'd seen convinced him that this woman was worth saving, even if it meant risking everything he'd spent years trying to forget. Jake Sullivan had seen plenty of desperate people drift into Redemption Creek over the years. But there was something different about the dark-haired woman who'd been sleeping in the church stable with her sick mare. Maybe it was the way she spoke gentle words to the suffering animal, or how she'd given the horse her last apple while her own stomach growled with hunger. Or maybe it was the way she reminded him of another woman, another time, when he'd failed to save what mattered most. Miss, Jake approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. After 3 years of self-imposed isolation on his ranch, he'd forgotten how to talk to respectable women. Name's Jake Sullivan. I've got a proposition for you. Elena looked up from where she knelt beside Rosemary, her green eyes wary. Her traveling dress, once probably elegant in Boston, was now dusty and worn. I told the others, I'm not selling her. She's not for sale at any price. Not looking to buy her, Jake said, removing his hat. His dark hair was longer than fashionable, touched with silver at the temples, despite his 34 years. Looking to save her. Elena stood slowly, and Jake noticed how she swayed slightly. When had she last eaten? I don't understand. I've got a veterinarian friend 2 towns over, Dr. Henley. He's got ways of healing animals that most folks would call impossible. Jake pulled a leather pouch from his vest. I'll pay for his services, provide food and shelter for both of you while your horse recovers. No strings attached. The suspicion in Elena's eyes deepened. And what do you want in return? Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying the packed earth beneath his boots. 3 years ago, he would have said nothing. 3 years ago, he would have ridden past this woman and her dying horse without a second glance. But something about her reminded him why he'd once believed in helping people, before the war took everything good out of him. Maybe I just want to see something good happen for once, he said finally. Elena's laugh was bitter. Good things don't happen to women like me, Mr. Sullivan. I learned that lesson the hard way. What kind of woman is that? The kind who gets tricked into traveling 1,000 miles to marry a man who doesn't exist. Elena's chin lifted defiantly, and Jake caught a glimpse of the steel beneath her exhaustion. The kind who trusts lying words and pretty letters. Jake felt something shift in his chest, an old protective instinct. he thought had died with his family. This woman had been deceived, abandoned, left with nothing. Just like he'd been left with nothing after the Apache raid that took his wife and son. But unlike him, she was still fighting. Dr. Henley doesn't ask questions, Jake said quietly, and neither do I. All I'm asking is that you let me try to save your horse. Elena stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. Jake forced himself to meet her gaze, though it had been years since he'd let anyone look at him so directly. Why? She whispered. The honest answer was too complicated. Because she reminded him of Elena, because her horse reminded him of the Mustang his son had loved, because 3 years of guilt was eating him alive, and maybe saving this woman's horse would somehow balance the scales. Instead, he said, because some things are worth saving. Lena's hands trembled as she touched Rosemary's neck, feeling the labored breathing, the fever burning through the mare's coat. The horse had carried her faithfully from Boston, never complaining, never giving up. Even now, dying, Rosemary nuzzled Elena's palm with gentle affection. If I say yes, Elena said slowly, what happens to me while she's being treated? You'll stay at my ranch, Jake said. Separate quarters, of course. I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who comes by twice a week. You'll be safe. Safe. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly safe. Certainly not in the 3 months since her father died, leaving her penniless and at the mercy of relatives who saw her as nothing more than a burden to be disposed of. And if she doesn't recover? Jake's jaw tightened. Then at least she'll die comfortable with proper food and clean water and someone who cares about her. It was the kindness in his voice that broke her resolve. This stranger was offering her hope when she had none left, offering to help when everyone else had turned away. All right, Elena whispered, but I'm paying you back, every penny. I don't know how yet, but I will. Jake nodded solemnly. We'll work something out. As he helped her gather her few belongings, Elena caught him studying her with those intense dark eyes. There was something haunted about Jake Sullivan, something that spoke of loss and regret. But there was also something solid and dependable, like the mountains that surrounded this harsh frontier town. Mr. Sullivan? Elena said as he prepared to load Rosemary into his wagon with surprising gentleness. Thank you. Jake's rare smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Don't thank me yet, Miss Mitchell, Elena Mitchell. Don't thank me yet, Miss Mitchell. Let's see if Dr. Henley's miracles still work. But as Jake carefully settled the dying horse in his wagon, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the real miracle had already begun, and it had nothing to do with veterinary medicine. What Elena discovered at Jake's ranch made her question everything she thought she knew about the man who'd offered to save her horse, and everything she thought she knew about herself. The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across a valley that took Elena's breath away. Rolling hills dotted with cattle stretched toward purple mountains, while a clear creek wound through grassland that seemed to go on forever. The main house was larger than she'd expected, solid timber and stone, built to last generations. But it was the silence that struck her most. This ranch was built for a family, yet Jake Sullivan lived here alone. Your quarters are in the east wing, Jake said, helping her down from the wagon. Mrs. Chen stocked the pantry yesterday. You'll have everything you need. As they carefully moved Rosemary into a clean stall in the barn, Elena marveled at the care Jake took with her dying horse. His movements were gentle, experienced. These were the hands of a man who understood suffering. How long to reach Dr. Henley? Elena asked. Day and a half, hard ride. I'll leave at first light. Jake's dark eyes met hers. Miss Mitchell, I need you to understand something. Dr. Henley's methods are unconventional. If word got out about what he can do, there'd be folks who'd want to use his abilities for their own gain. That's why he works in secret. Elena frowned. What kind of methods? The kind that saved my prize stallion when 3 other veterinarians said he was finished. The kind that brought a rancher's prize bull back from near death last winter. Jake paused. The kind most people wouldn't believe if they saw them with their own eyes. Are you saying Dr. Henley can work miracles? I'm saying he can do things that look like miracles to folks who don't understand them. Elena studied Jake's weathered face, looking for signs of deception. She'd been fooled once by a man's pretty words. She wouldn't be fooled again. But Jake's eyes held only honesty and something that looked like hope. "All right," she said finally. "I'll trust you." That evening, Elena explored her quarters and found them far more comfortable than anything she'd expected. A sitting room with a stone fireplace, a bedroom with a real mattress, even a small kitchen. It was clear these rooms had been prepared for someone special, a wife perhaps, or family members who never came. When Mrs. Chen arrived to prepare dinner, Elena learned more about her mysterious benefactor. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman with sharp eyes and gentle hands who'd been with Jake since he'd built the ranch 5 years ago. "Mr. Jake, he good man," Mrs. Chen said as they prepared vegetables together, "but very sad, very alone." "Has he always lived alone here?" Elena asked carefully. Mrs. Chen's face grew somber. "He built this place for family, but family gone now. Apache raid 3 years ago. They take everything." Elena's heart clenched. "His wife and children?" "Wife Elena, little boy Marcus. Mr. Jake, he was away buying cattle. Come home too." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "He blame himself, always blame himself." Now Elena understood the haunted look in Jake's eyes. The way he'd built this beautiful ranch but lived in it like a ghost. He'd lost everything that mattered and somehow kept going, kept functioning, but hadn't really lived since. Just like she hadn't really lived since her father died. "That's why he helped you," Mrs. Chen continued. "First time in 3 years he care about saving something. Mrs. Chen think maybe you help him too." "I'm only staying until my horse recovers," Elena said quickly. Mrs. Chen's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. That night, Elena stood at her window and watched Jake work with his cattle in the moonlight. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, confident and capable despite carrying such profound loss. He was a man who'd been broken but refused to stay broken, who'd lost his family but still had enough compassion to help a stranger's dying horse. When he looked up toward her window, Elena stepped back quickly, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with being caught watching. She couldn't afford to feel anything for Jake Sullivan beyond gratitude. She had no home, no money, no prospects, nothing to offer a man like him. But as she lay in the comfortable bed he'd provided, listening to the wind whisper through the valley, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the gentleness in his calloused hands and the way his rare smile had made her feel like she might actually be worth saving. And for the first time in months, she wondered if maybe there was something worth saving in her too. What happened during Jake's absence would test everything Elena thought she knew about strength, survival, and the thin line between desperation and courage. Jake left before dawn with Dr. Henley's address tucked in his saddlebag and a promise to return within 4 days. Elena stood in the barn doorway, watching his strong silhouette disappear into the morning mist, and felt utterly alone despite Mrs. Chen's reassuring presence. "Rosemary's getting worse," she whispered to Mrs. Chen as they checked on the mare that first morning. The horse's breathing was labored, her eyes dull with fever. Elena had seen enough death to recognize it approaching, and despite Jake's confidence in Dr. Henley's abilities, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. "Mr. Jake, he never give up," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You no give up either." But by the second day, Elena's faith was crumbling. Rosemary wouldn't eat, barely lifted her head when Elena entered the stall. The mare who'd carried her faithfully across half the country was slipping away, and there was nothing Elena could do but watch. That's when the strangers arrived. Elena was brushing Rosemary's coat, whispering gentle reassurances, when she heard horses approaching fast. Through the barn window, she saw 3 men dismounting near the main house. Rough-looking men with hard eyes and guns worn low on their hips. "Miss Mitchell!" Mrs. Chen's voice carried a note of warning as she hurried toward the barn. "Bad men here. They ask questions about you." Elena's blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" "They say you steal money. Say they here to bring you back to face justice." Mrs. Chen's eyes were wide with concern. "But Mrs. Chen think they lie." Elena's worst fears were coming true. Somehow her stepfather's men had tracked her down. Harrison Walsh had blamed her for his gambling debts after her father died, claiming she'd stolen money that was rightfully his. It was a lie, but Harrison had powerful friends in Boston who would believe his word over hers. How much they know? Elena asked, her mind racing. They know you here. They know about Sick Horse. They say they take you back to Boston today. Elena's hands clenched into fists. She traveled 1,000 miles to escape Harrison's lies and manipulation. She wouldn't go back, not to face false charges, not to be sold to the highest bidder like a piece of property. Mrs. Chen, I need you to listen carefully, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. If anything happens to me, tell Mr. Sullivan the truth. Tell him my stepfather, Harrison Walsh, is trying to force me back to Boston to cover his gambling debts. Tell him I never stole anything. Mrs. Chen nodded grimly. What you do now? Elena looked at Rosemary, then at the rifle hanging on the barn wall. Jake's rifle, loaded and ready. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, despite her mother's protests that it wasn't ladylike. She'd never thought those lessons would save her life. I'm going to buy us some time, Elena said, reaching for the rifle. The leader of the three men was a thin, cruel-faced individual named Garrett. Elena recognized him, one of Harrison's cronies from the gambling halls. The other two looked like hired muscle, all swagger and intimidation. Miss Mitchell, Garrett called out as Elena emerged from the barn, rifle held low but ready. Quite a chase you've led us on. Time to come home and face the music. I'm not going anywhere with you, Elena said clearly. I've committed no crime, and you have no authority here. Garrett laughed. You stole $500 from your legal guardian, girl. That's a hanging offense in some territories. That's a lie, and you know it. Your word against Harrison Walsh's. Who do you think they'll believe? Garrett's eyes glittered with malice. Now put down that rifle before you hurt yourself and come along peaceful-like. Elena raised the rifle to her shoulder, her father's training taking over. I said I'm not going anywhere. The change in the men's demeanor was immediate. The easy confidence vanished, replaced by wary calculation. They'd expected a frightened, helpless woman, not someone prepared to fight. You don't have the nerve to pull that trigger, Garrett sneered, but his hand had moved to his gun. Try me, Elena said, her voice deadly calm. The standoff stretched taut as a wire, three armed men against one woman with everything to lose. In the distance, Elena could hear Mrs. Chen moving toward the house, probably to find additional weapons or send word to neighboring ranches. You can't stay here forever, Garrett said. Sullivan ain't coming back for days. We can wait. Then you'll be waiting a long time, Elena replied, because I'm not the same frightened girl who ran from Boston. I've got nothing left to lose, which makes me very dangerous. For the first time, she saw doubt flicker in Garrett's eyes, but Elena knew the truth. She could hold them off for now, but not indefinitely. And when Jake returned, he'd be riding straight into an ambush, unless she found a way to end this first. What Elena did next would prove that sometimes a woman's greatest weapon isn't a gun. It's her willingness to risk everything for the truth. The standoff continued through the afternoon, with Garrett and his men taking positions around the ranch while Elena held the barn. Mrs. Chen had disappeared into the main house, and Elena prayed the older woman was safe. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Garrett, she called out, I have a proposition for you. We're listening, came the reply from behind the water trough where he'd taken cover. Single combat. You and me, guns drawn at 20 paces. If you win, I'll come back to Boston willingly. If I win, you and your friends ride out and never come back. Garrett's laughter echoed across the yard. A woman challenging me to a gunfight? That's rich. Scared, Elena taunted. Harrison always said you were fast with a gun. Guess he was wrong. The insult hit its mark. Elena could practically feel Garrett's anger from across the yard. Men like him lived on their reputations. Questioning his skill with a gun was questioning everything he thought he was. All right, girl. Garrett's voice was tight with fury. You want to die like a man? I'll accommodate you. As they moved into position in the dusty area between the barn and the house, Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a good shot. Her father had made sure of that. But Garrett made his living with violence. This wasn't about skill anymore. It was about justice and protecting the new life she was trying to build. 20 paces, Garrett called through it out, his cronies watching from a safe distance. They stood back to back, then began walking. Elena counted each step, feeling the weight of Jake's Colt in her hand, thinking about everything that had led her to this moment. The lies that drove her from Boston, the false letter that brought her west, the dying horse that led her to Jake. All of it had been leading to this. 10, she whispered to herself. Behind her, she could feel Garrett's presence, his eagerness for violence radiating like heat from a forge. 15. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Steady hand, clear eye, Elena. Don't think about anything but the target. 20. They turned. Elena's gun was already moving as she spun, muscle memory and desperation guiding her movements. She saw Garrett's surprise at her speed, saw his own weapon rising, heard the thunder of 2 shots fired almost simultaneously. Garrett's bullet whistled past her ear. Elena's found its mark. The gambler's gun dropped from nerveless fingers as he clutched his shoulder, blood seeping through his vest. His 2 companions froze, hands hovering over their weapons, suddenly uncertain whether they wanted to face the woman who'd just outdrawn their leader. You listen to me, Elena said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. I never stole a penny from Harrison Walsh. I worked in my father's store for 6 years, keeping books that Harrison was too drunk to manage himself. When my father died, Harrison owed $3,000 to the wrong kind of people. She kept her gun trained on the wounded Garrett while addressing his companions. He tried to marry me off to pay his debts. When I refused, he claimed I'd stolen money that never existed. You've been chasing an innocent woman on the word of a desperate gambler. You got no proof of that, one of the men said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena smiled grimly. Actually, I do. She reached into her skirt pocket with her free hand and withdrew a folded piece of paper. Harrison's IOU to the Crimson Dragon gambling house in Boston. $5,000, signed in his own hand, dated 2 weeks after my father died. I took it from his desk before I ran. The men exchanged glances. In the frontier territories, gambling debts were serious business, the kind that got men killed if they couldn't pay. Why didn't you show us this before? The second man asked. Would you have believed me? Or would you have taken Harrison's word because he's a man and I'm just a woman? Elena's eyes flashed. Besides, I shouldn't have to prove my innocence to bounty hunters who never bothered to verify their information. Garrett struggled to his feet, clutching his wounded shoulder. This ain't over, he snarled. Yes, it is, Elena said firmly. Take your friends and ride out. If I see you again, I won't aim for your shoulder. As the 3 men mounted their horses and rode away into the gathering darkness, Elena felt her knees go weak. She'd done it. She'd faced down her past and won. But more than that, she'd proven to herself that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Miss Elena, Mrs. Chen emerged from the house, carrying Jake's backup rifle. You very brave, very foolish, but very brave. Lena managed a shaky laugh. I couldn't let them take me back. Not when I finally found somewhere I might belong. Mrs. Chen's knowing smile returned. Mr. Jake, he'd be very proud when he hear what you do. As they walked back toward the barn to check on Rosemary, Elena realized something had changed inside her during that confrontation. For the first time since her father died, she felt like she had some control over her own destiny. And for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she was beginning to think that she might actually want to stay. What Jake found when he returned from Dr. Henley's would shatter everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman he'd left at his ranch, and everything he thought he'd lost forever. Jake rode through the ranch gates just as the first light of dawn painted the mountains pink and gold, Dr. Henley beside him, and a wagon full of mysterious supplies following behind. He'd pushed hard to make the return trip in 3 days instead of 4, driven by an urgency he couldn't quite explain. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the air, see it in the way Mrs. Chen hurried out to meet them before they'd even dismounted. Mr. Jake, thank goodness you're back, she said, her usually calm demeanor cracked with worry. Much trouble while you gone. Elena, Jake said immediately, his heart clenching. Is she hurt? Miss Elena, fine. She very strong woman, Mr. Jake. Stronger than you know. As Mrs. Chen quickly related the events of the past 3 days, the arrival of the bounty hunters, the standoff, the gunfight, Jake felt a cold fury building in his chest. Elena had faced armed men alone, had been forced to fight for her freedom while he was away. He should have been here to protect her. Where is she now, he asked, already striding toward the barn, with sick horse. She no leave mare's side since gunfight, very worried. Jake found Elena in Rosemary's stall, curled up in the corner, with her head resting against the wooden wall. She'd fallen asleep sitting up, one hand still resting on the mare's neck. She looked younger in sleep, more vulnerable, but Jake could see the new steel in the set of her shoulders even while she dozed. This was a woman who'd faced down 3 armed men and won. Elena, he said softly. Her eyes flew open immediately, and Jake realized she'd been sleeping light, ready to wake at the first sign of trouble. When she saw him, relief flooded her features. Jake, you're back early. She scrambled to her feet, suddenly self-conscious. How did it go with Dr. Henley? Never mind that right now. Jake stepped closer, his dark eyes searching her face for signs of injury. Mrs. Chen told me what happened. Are you hurt? I'm fine, they're gone. I don't think they'll be back. Elena's chin lifted with that familiar, defiant tilt. I can take care of myself, Mr. Sullivan. I know you can, Jake said quietly. That's what scares me. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the soft morning light filtering through the barn windows. Jake saw everything in Elena's eyes, the fear she'd hidden during the confrontation, the determination that had carried her through, the loneliness that matched his own. I should have been here, he said finally. You were helping my horse. Besides, some fights we have to face alone. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavier than Jake had intended. He saw Elena's eyes widen slightly, saw the quick intake of breath that suggested she understood the implication. Dr. Henley, Jake said, stepping back to safer ground. He's here to see Rosemary. Dr. Henley turned out to be a small, elderly man with gentle hands and the strangest collection of medical supplies Elena had ever seen. Along with traditional veterinary tools, his bag contained herbs she didn't recognize, crystals that seemed to glow with their own light, and vials of liquid that swirled with colors that shouldn't exist. Ah, Dr. Henley murmured as he examined Rosemary. Yes, I see. She's been holding on, waiting for something. Animals do that sometimes. They refuse to die until they know their purpose is fulfilled. Her purpose? Elena asked. Bringing you here, of course. Dr. Henley's eyes twinkled. This mare has been fighting death for weeks longer than should be possible. She knew you needed to reach this place, these people. Jake watched as Dr. Henley worked, combining traditional medicine with techniques that defied explanation. The old doctor's hand seemed to glow with warm light as he touched the horse, and the mysterious liquids he administered shimmered like captured starlight. Is that real? Elena whispered to Jake. The light? I stopped questioning Dr. Henley's methods after he saved my stallion, Jake replied. Sometimes things don't need to make sense to work. Within an hour, Rosemary was standing. Within 2 hours, she was drinking water and eating hay. By noon, she was walking around her stall with clear eyes and steady steps. Impossible, Elena breathed, tears streaming down her face as she hugged her mare's neck. Not impossible, Dr. Henley said, packing his unusual supplies. Just improbable. Sometimes the universe conspires to keep things alive that are meant to serve a greater purpose. As Dr. Henley prepared to leave, he pulled Jake aside. That woman has been through more than you know, my friend, but she's exactly where she needs to be. What do you mean? Some people are broken so they can be rebuilt stronger. Some horses are saved because they bring the right people together. Dr. Henley glanced toward Elena, who was lavishing attention on her recovered mare. Don't let fear keep you from what you both need. After the doctor departed, Jake found Elena in the pasture, watching Rosemary graze in the afternoon sunlight. The mare looked completely healthy, as if she'd never been near death. I can't begin to thank you, Elena said as Jake joined her at the fence. You saved her life. You saved your own life while I was gone, Jake replied. That took more courage than anything I did. Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, Jake, there's something you should know about why those men were after me. She told him everything, her father's death, Harrison's gambling debts, the false accusations, the desperate flight west. Jake listened without interruption, his jaw tightening as he understood how thoroughly she'd been betrayed by people who should have protected her. You believed me, Elena said when she finished. Even before you heard the whole story, you believed I was innocent. I know what it looks like when someone's running from something that isn't their fault. Jake said simply. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Rosemary explore her new home. The sun was setting again, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson that seemed impossibly beautiful after the darkness of the past few days. Elena, Jake said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. She turned to face him, something in his tone making her heart beat faster. Do you want to stay? What Elena's answer revealed would force both of them to confront the truth they'd been dancing around since the moment they met, and the choice that would determine everything. Stay? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Jake, I can't just... You can, Jake said, his dark eyes intense in the fading light. I'm not talking about charity or temporary refuge. I'm talking about making a life here. With me. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Jake, you don't understand. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no family, no. You faced down 3 armed men to protect what matters to you. You've shown more strength in the past week than most people show in a lifetime. Jake took a step closer. You brought life back to this ranch just by being here. I'm not your dead wife, Elena said quietly, and immediately regretted the harshness of her words. Jake flinched, but didn't step back. No, you're not, Elena. And I'm not the same man who built this place for her, Mer. Maybe that's why this could work. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening air. Jake, I care about you, more than I should, but I can't be someone's second choice, someone you settle for because your first choice is gone. Is that what you think this is? Jake's voice was rough with emotion. Elena and I, we were children when we married. Young and hopeful and completely unprepared for the realities of frontier life. What I feel for you is nothing like what I felt for her. How is it different? Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains where the last light clung to the peaks. Elena needed me to take care of her. You don't need anyone to take care of you. You've proven that. But maybe we could take care of each other. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Jake, I know I'm damaged goods, he continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I know I've got more ghosts than any woman should have to live with. But these past few days, having you here, watching you fight for what you believe in, it's the first time in 3 years I've felt like I might actually be alive instead of just existing. Elena turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the lines of grief carved around his eyes, the way he held himself like a man expecting to be hurt. But she also saw the gentleness in his calloused hands, the way he'd risked everything to save her horse, the strength that had allowed him to keep going when most men would have given up. What exactly are you asking me? She said finally. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrifying and completely unexpected. Jake, we've known each other less than a week. In the frontier, people make life and death decisions based on less, Jake said. I'm not talking about a marriage based on romance and pretty words. I'm talking about a partnership between 2 people who understand what it means to lose everything and keep fighting anyway. Elena felt her heart hammering. A business arrangement? No, Jake's eyes met hers. Not business. Something more honest than that. I need someone who can handle this life, who won't break under the pressure of frontier living. You need security, a place to belong, protection from people like Harrison Walsh. We both need, what? A second chance. Elena walked away from the fence, needing space to think. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Jake represented safety, belonging, a chance to build something meaningful. But another part of her remembered the lies that had brought her west, the false promises and manufactured dreams. What if it doesn't work? She asked. What if we can't make each other happy? What if we can? Jake countered. Elena, I'm not promising you'll fall in love with me or that I'll be the husband you dreamed of when you were a girl. But I can promise you will never be hungry, never be homeless, never have to face men like Garrett alone again. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Jake was quiet for so long, Elena thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. A reason to care about tomorrow. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She thought about Rosemary, miraculously healed, and grazing peacefully in the pasture. She thought about the way Jake had risked everything to save a stranger's dying horse. She thought about the life she could build here, far from Harrison's lies and manipulation. But mostly she thought about the way Jake had looked at her when she'd told him about the gunfight, not with pity or condescension, but with respect for what she'd accomplished. "I need conditions," she said finally. Jake nodded. "Name them." "Separate bedrooms unless things change between us naturally. I won't be bought, Jake, even with kindness." "Agreed. I want to contribute to this ranch. I'm not going to sit in the parlor doing needlework while you do all the work. I can keep books, help with the cattle, whatever needs doing." "You'll probably be better at the books than I am." Elena took a deep breath. "And if either of us decides this isn't working, we end it honestly. No recriminations, no bitterness." "Fair enough." Jake extended his hand. "Partners?" Elena looked at his calloused palm, thinking about all the paths that had led her to this moment. The lies that drove her from Boston, the dying horse that brought her to Jake, the confrontation that proved she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Maybe Henley was right. Maybe the universe did conspire to put people where they needed to be. She took Jake's hand. Partners. What happened on their wedding day would test the strength of their new partnership before it had even truly begun, and reveal a truth that neither of them was prepared to face. The ceremony took place 3 days later in the small church at the heart of Redemption Creek, with Reverend Morrison officiating and Mrs. Chen serving as witness. Elena wore her best traveling dress, carefully mended and cleaned, while Jake stood stiffly in his only good suit. It should have been a simple, practical affair, the binding of two people who needed each other for survival rather than love. But as Elena spoke the traditional vows, promising to honor and cherish the man beside her, she felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with practical arrangements. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Morrison announced. Elena and Jake looked at each other with sudden uncertainty. They'd discussed the practical aspects of their marriage extensively, but had somehow failed to address this moment. Jake leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. His lips touched hers gently, briefly, a seal on their bargain that felt nothing like a business transaction. When they broke apart, Elena saw something in Jake's dark eyes that made her pulse quicken, a warmth that suggested their partnership might become something more complicated than either of them had planned. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan," the Reverend said, beaming. "May your union be blessed with happiness and prosperity." As they walked out of the church together, Elena noticed the way the townspeople watched them with curious eyes. She was still a stranger here, the mysterious woman who'd arrived with a dying horse and somehow captured the heart of their most eligible widower. "They're all wondering what you see in me," Elena murmured to Jake as they climbed into his wagon. "Let them wonder," Jake replied. "What matters is what we see in each other." But their quiet contentment was shattered before they had even reached the ranch. A rider was waiting in their front yard, a young man Elena didn't recognize, dusty from hard travel and bearing an official-looking envelope. "Jake Sullivan?" the messenger asked. "That's right. Message from the territorial governor's office. Urgent." Jake tore open the envelope, his face growing grim as he read. Elena watched the color drain from his cheeks, saw his hands tighten on the paper. "What is it?" she asked. "The Apache," Jake said quietly. "There's been another raid, a family named Patterson, about 50 miles north. They want me to guide a cavalry unit to track the raiders." Elena felt ice form in her stomach. "The same Apache the same band that killed Elena and Marcus, yes." Jake's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could see the old pain blazing in his eyes. "The territorial government considers me an expert on their movements." "You don't have to Elena said quickly. Jake looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. "Yes, I do. As long as Black Wolf's band is raiding in this territory, no family is safe. I can't let another woman lose her husband and child because I was too cowardly to help stop them." Elena understood the weight of duty and survival that drove Jake's decision, but she also understood that sending him after the men who'd destroyed his first family was asking him to face his worst nightmares. "When do you leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow at dawn. The trail gets colder every hour we wait." Their wedding night was spent in separate preparation. Jake cleaning his weapons and checking his gear while Elena helped Mrs. Chen prepare supplies for the journey. Neither of them spoke about the bitter irony of beginning their marriage with the same enemy that had ended Jake's first one. Mrs. Chen, Elena said as they packed jerky and hardtack, "How dangerous is this really?" The older woman's face was grave. Black Wolf very smart, very cruel. He know Mr. Jake track him before. No Mr. Jake want revenge. This time maybe he waiting. You think it's a trap? Mrs. Chen think Apache no fool. They know Mr. Jake still dangerous to them. Know he helped cavalry find them before. She paused in her packing. Maybe they want to finish what they start 3 years ago. That night, Elena lay awake in her new bedroom, listening to Jake move restlessly in the room across the hall. Their marriage was less than 12 hours old, and already she was facing the possibility of becoming a widow. Around midnight, she heard Jake's door open and his footsteps move toward the front porch. Elena wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed. She found him sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the moonlit mountains. His rifle lay across his knees, and his face was etched with old grief and new determination. Couldn't sleep either, Elena asked softly. Jake glanced up at her. Sorry if I woke you. You didn't. Elena settled beside him on the steps, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Jake, you don't owe me an explanation, but is this about revenge? Jake was quiet for a long time, his fingers unconsciously stroking the worn stock of his rifle. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. For the first year after Elena and Marcus died, revenge was all that kept me breathing. And now I've got something to come back to. Jake's eyes met hers in the moon-shaded eyebrow. That changes everything. Elena felt something twist in her chest at the raw honesty in his voice. Jake, if something happens to you out there, it won't. But if it does, it won't, Jake repeated firmly, because I'm not the same man who rode out looking for revenge 3 years ago. That man had nothing to lose. This man has a wife to come home to. The word wife hung between them, still new and strange and full of possibilities neither of them had fully explored. Promise me something, Elena said. What? Promise me you'll come back, not just for duty or revenge or whatever demons you need to face. Promise you'll come back because we have something worth building here. Jake turned to face her fully, and Elena saw something in his expression that took her breath away. A tenderness that had nothing to do with practical partnerships or convenient arrangements. I promise, he said quietly. As they sat together in the moonlight, both of them understood that their marriage had already become something more than either of them had bargained for. And both of them prayed it wouldn't end before they had a chance to discover what that something might become. What Jake discovered on the Apache Trail would force him to choose between the ghosts of his past and the promise of his future. A choice that would determine whether he returned to Elena as the man she'd married or didn't return at all. The cavalry unit consisted of 15 men led by Captain Morrison, a young officer whose textbook knowledge of Indian fighting had never been tested in actual combat. Jake rode point, reading signs in the dust and broken grass that told the story of Black Wolf's movements. They're heading north toward the Badlands, Jake reported as they paused to water their horses at a creek. Moving fast, but not like they're running. More like they're going somewhere specific. Could be another target, Captain Morrison suggested. Jake studied the tracks more carefully, his weathered face grim. No, these aren't raiders heading toward a target. These are warriors, heading home. What's the difference? Raiders carry supplies for a quick strike. These tracks show they're traveling heavy, probably with captives or stolen goods. They're confident no one can follow them into the Badlands. Captain Morrison's jaw tightened. The Patterson family had 2 young daughters. Jake felt the familiar cold fury building in his chest. 3 years ago, it had been Elena and Marcus. Now it was 2 little girls who might still be alive if they moved fast enough. How far ahead? The captain asked. Half a day, maybe less. But Captain, once we enter the Badlands, we're on their territory. They'll know we're coming long before we see them. Are you suggesting we turn back? Jake looked at the young officer, seeing himself 3 years ago, full of righteous anger and military confidence, unprepared for the reality of fighting an enemy who knew every rock and canyon in this wilderness. I'm suggesting we be very careful how we approach this. They made camp that night in a defensible position among some rocks, with sentries posted and fires kept low. Jake found himself thinking about Elena, probably lying awake in their marriage bed, worrying about him. The thought gave him something to focus on besides the familiar weight of grief and rage. Sullivan, Captain Morrison, approached him as he checked his weapons. I've read the reports about what happened to your family. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. The men are wondering, is this personal for you? Jake looked up from cleaning his rifle. Captain, every raid is personal for someone. The difference is whether you let that help you think clearly or make you stupid. And which is it for you? Jake considered the question honestly. 3 years ago, he would have ridden straight into Black Wolf's camp alone, guns blazing, more interested in dying gloriously than fighting smart. Now he had Elena waiting for him in a future that suddenly seemed worth preserving. I'm going to get those girls back and come home to my wife, Jake said simply. Everything else is just details. The attack came at dawn, as Jake had expected, but it didn't come from the direction anyone anticipated. Black Wolf had doubled back during the night, circling around to attack from behind while they focused on the trail ahead. It was a classic Apache tactic, and Jake cursed himself for not seeing it coming. Ambush! He shouted, diving for cover as arrows and rifle fire erupted from the rocks above their camp. The battle was swift and brutal. Captain Morrison went down in the first volley, a bullet through his shoulder. 3 soldiers died before they could even return fire. Jake found himself commanding the survivors, his experience and frontier instincts taking over. Johnson, Miller, take the high ground to the west, he shouted over the gunfire. Patterson, Williams, cover the horses. But even as he fought, Jake realized this wasn't a random ambush. Black Wolf had positioned his warriors too precisely, known their exact location too well. Someone had told the Apache where to find them. The thought hit him like a physical blow. This was exactly what Mrs. Chen had suspected. Black Wolf wasn't just raiding, he was hunting Jake specifically, using the cavalry unit as bait to draw him into the perfect killing ground. They're trying to flank us, Sergeant Harrison called out. Jake could see the Apache warriors moving through the rocks with deadly precision, cutting off their escape routes one by one. In a few minutes, they'd be completely surrounded. He had 2 choices. Order a desperate charge that might break them free, but would cost most of the unit their lives, or try to hold their position and hope reinforcements arrived before they ran out of ammunition. 3 years ago, he would have chosen the charge without hesitation. Death in battle was preferable to the slow agony of living with loss, but now he could hear Elena's voice in his memory. Promise you'll come back because we have something worth building here. Jake made his choice. Sergeant, he called out, signal for parley. Sir? You heard me. White flag! Sergeant Harrison looked at him like he'd lost his mind, but followed orders. The gunfire gradually stopped as the white cloth appeared above their makeshift fortifications. A voice called out from the rocks above, speaking in accented but clear English. Jake Sullivan, you want to talk? You come out alone. Jake stood slowly, his hands visible, but his gun still holstered. He walked out into the open space between the 2 forces, every nerve alert for the arrow or bullet that would end his life. Black Wolf emerged from the rocks, a tall, lean man with intelligent eyes and the scars of many battles. Jake had seen him only once before, 3 years ago, but the face was burned into his memory. You look older, Sullivan, Black Wolf said. Grief ages a man. So does killing, Jake replied. Black Wolf smiled without humor. Yes, it does. He gestured toward the trapped cavalry unit. Your young captain, he is wounded but alive. Your soldiers, they fight bravely, but they are outnumbered. What do you want? The same thing you want, an end to this. Black Wolf's eyes were steady on Jake's face. You have hunted my people for 3 years. I have lost warriors because of your tracking skills. This could continue until we are all dead, or we could find another way. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're offering a trade. Your life for theirs. You stay, they go free, including the Patterson children. The children are alive? For now, Black Wolf's expression didn't change, but children are difficult to keep alive in the wilderness. Accidents happen. Jake understood the threat. He also understood that this was exactly what Black Wolf had planned from the beginning. Use the cavalry unit and the kidnapped children as bait to get Jake alone and vulnerable. "Why is my death so important to you?" Jake asked. "Because as long as you live, the cavalry will have someone who can follow us into places they cannot go alone. Because your skills have cost my people too much blood." Black Wolf paused. "And because a man who has lost everything has nothing left to lose, that makes him very dangerous." Jake thought about Elena waiting at the ranch, about the life they were just beginning to build together. For the first time in 3 years, he had something to lose again, which made his next decision the hardest thing he'd ever done. "I accept your terms," he said quietly. What happened next would prove that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't dying for someone you love. It's finding a way to live for them instead. "Wait," Jake said before Black Wolf could respond. "I want to add terms of my own." The Apache leader's eyes narrowed. "You are in no position to negotiate." "Actually, I am." Jake gestured toward the rocks where his men were hidden. "You want me alive, not dead." "Tin. Dead, I'm just another casualty. Alive, I'm the tracker who's been hunting you for 3 years. Which one is more valuable to you?" Black Wolf studied him for a long moment. "What do you propose?" "Single combat, you and me, knives only. Winner takes all. If you win, you get your revenge, and my men go free with the children. If I win, you let all the captives go and move your raiding to another territory." "And why would I agree to risk myself when I already have you trapped?" Jake smiled grimly. "Because you're not just a war leader, you're a legend. Your people follow you because they believe you're invincible in personal combat. If you refuse to face one white man in single combat, that legend dies whether you kill me or not." He saw the flicker of uncertainty in Black Wolf's eyes and pressed his advantage. "Besides, your warriors have heard our conversation. They know I've challenged you. Word will spread to other bands. Are you the chief who conquered Jake Sullivan in fair combat, or the one who needed 20 warriors to trap one man?" Black Wolf was silent for nearly a minute, and Jake could practically see him weighing the tactical advantages against the political necessity of maintaining his reputation. "Very well," Black Wolf said finally. "Single combat. But when I kill you, Sullivan, I will make sure your new wife knows how you died, begging for mercy." Jake felt ice form in his veins. "How do you know about my wife?" "I know many things. I know you married the woman with the sick horse 3 days ago. I know she faced down 3 men with guns to protect what was hers. I know she is the reason you finally have something to lose again." Black Wolf's smile was sharp as a blade. "That knowledge makes you weaker, not stronger." The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. Black Wolf had been watching the ranch, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elena was in danger even if Jake won this fight. "The combat," Jake said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "What are the rules?" "Simple. Knives only. Fight to the death. The survivor honors the terms we agreed on." Jake nodded, his mind racing. Black Wolf was younger, faster, and had been fighting for survival his entire life. In a straight knife fight, Jake's chances were poor at best. But Jake had one advantage Black Wolf didn't know about. He no longer wanted to die. 3 years ago, facing Black Wolf in single combat would have been a form of elaborate suicide. Jake would have fought hard but secretly welcomed death as an end to his suffering. Now, with Elena waiting for him, death was the enemy, not the goal. They cleared a circle in the dust between the two forces. Jake's surviving soldiers watched with grim faces, understanding that their lives depended on their tracker's skill with a blade. Black Wolf's warriors formed a wider circle, confident in their leader's abilities. "Any last words, Sullivan?" Black Wolf asked, drawing a wicked-looking knife with a bone handle. "Yeah," Jake said, pulling his own blade, a sturdy frontier knife his father had given him. "I'm going home to my wife." They circled each other slowly, looking for openings. Black Wolf moved like a dancer, fluid and graceful, his knife weaving hypnotic patterns in the air. Jake moved more defensively, waiting for his opponent to commit to an attack. The first clash came suddenly, Black Wolf darting forward with lightning speed, his blade aimed at Jake's throat. Jake twisted away, feeling the knife whisper past his ear, and tried a counterattack that Black Wolf easily avoided. You are slow, old man, Black Wolf taunted. Age and grief have made you weak. Jake didn't respond, focusing all his attention on reading his opponent's movements. Black Wolf was skilled, but he was also confident, maybe overconfident. That might be the opening Jake needed. They engaged again, a series of quick exchanges that left both men with minor cuts but no serious damage. Black Wolf was testing Jake's defenses, looking for patterns he could exploit. Your wife, Black Wolf said during a brief pause. She will not mourn you long. A woman like that, she will find another man quickly. Jake felt anger flare in his chest and forced it down. Black Wolf was trying to make him emotional, to cloud his judgment. It was exactly what Jake would have done in his position. Maybe, Jake said calmly, but she'll remember me fondly. The next exchange was more serious. Black Wolf launched a complex attack that forced Jake to give ground, his superior speed and agility beginning to tell. Jake took a shallow cut across his ribs and another on his forearm. But as he retreated, Jake noticed something. Black Wolf favored his right side slightly, protecting an old wound or weakness. It was barely visible, but it was there. Jake began to adjust his strategy, working to force Black Wolf to put weight on his left leg, to extend his right side. It was a dangerous game. Every second he spent maneuvering was another chance for Black Wolf to land a killing blow. She fought well, your woman, Black Wolf said as they circled again. 3 men with guns, and she faced them without fear. I respect that. Respected enough to leave her alone? After I kill you, perhaps, a woman with such courage might be useful alive. The threat was too much. Jake felt his control snap and launched a desperate attack, his knife seeking Black Wolf's heart. The Apache leader was ready for the emotional response, turning Jake's momentum against him and opening a long cut across Jake's shoulder. But Jake's seemingly reckless attack had accomplished something. It had forced Black Wolf to put his full weight on his left leg, and Jake had seen the slight grimace of pain. An old injury, probably from a horse or a fall. Something Black Wolf had learned to compensate for, but still a weakness. Jake began to work that weakness systematically, forcing Black Wolf to move in ways that aggravated the injury. It was a slow process, and Jake took more cuts in the exchange. But gradually he could see the Apache leader beginning to favor the leg more obviously. You fight like a woman, Black Wolf snarled, frustrated by Jake's defensive strategy, all hiding and waiting. I fight like a man who wants to go home, Jake replied. When Black Wolf's next attack came, Jake was ready. The Apache leader's weakened leg betrayed him for just an instant, causing him to plant his weight wrong during a lunge. Jake sidestepped the thrust and drove his knife deep into Black Wolf's side, between the ribs, angling up toward the heart. Black Wolf's eyes went wide with shock and pain. He tried to strike back, but Jake twisted the blade and felt his opponent's strength drain away. This is for Elena and Marcus, Jake whispered, as Black Wolf fell to his knees. And this, he said, driving the knife deeper, is for Elena. What Jake found when he finally returned home would test everything he and Elena had built together, and reveal the truth about what their marriage had become while he was away. The ride back to Redemption Creek took 4 days. Jake led the wounded cavalry unit and the 2 Patterson children, alive but traumatized, through the rugged terrain, while his own injuries bled through hastily applied bandages. Every mile stretched like an eternity, his thoughts focused on one thing: getting home to Elena. Black Wolf's words haunted him. I know she is the reason you finally have something to lose again. If the Apache leader had been watching the ranch, gathering intelligence about Elena, then other members of his band might still pose a threat. Jake pushed the horses harder, ignoring his own pain and exhaustion. When they finally crested the hill overlooking the Broken Arrow Ranch, Jake's heart nearly stopped. Smoke was rising from the direction of the main house. Sergeant Harrison, Jake called out, take the children to town. Get Dr. Morrison to treat your wounded. Sir, you're in no condition to— That's an order. Jake spurred his horse down the hill, his rifle ready despite his wounded shoulder. As he got closer, he realized the smoke was coming from the chimney, not from a burning building. But there were strange horses in the corral and voices carrying from the house. Jake dismounted carefully, his wounds making every movement painful. He worked his way around to the back of the house, using skills learned from 3 years of tracking Apache warriors. Through the kitchen window, he could see Elena moving around the room apparently unharmed. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by confusion. She was cooking for more people than just herself and Mrs. Chen. "Miss Elena," he heard Mrs. Chen's voice. "You sure about this plan?" "I'm sure," Elena replied, her voice carrying a note of determination Jake recognized. "If those Apache scouts are watching the ranch, they need to see that I'm not defenseless, that there are men here ready to fight." Jake crept closer to the window, trying to see who else was in the house. What he saw made him freeze in shock. Three men sat around his kitchen table, eating Elena's cooking and talking quietly among themselves. Men he didn't recognize, wearing the rough clothes of drifters or hired guns. Had Elena been forced to hire protection while he was away? Or was something else going on? "Ma'am," one of the men was saying, "you sure your husband's coming back? It's been 4 days and Apache raiders." "He's coming back," Elena said firmly. "Jake Sullivan doesn't break his promises." The loyalty in her voice sent warmth through Jake's chest, but he was still confused about who these men were and why they were in his house. "Thing is," another man said, "if he don't come back, you're going to need more than just our protection. A woman alone on a ranch this size, especially with Apache trouble in the territory. What are you suggesting, Mr. Carson?" Elena's voice had gone cold. Jake's blood turned to ice. Carson, he'd heard that name before. Marcus Carson, the ruthless land speculator who'd been trying to buy out small ranchers throughout the territory. "I'm suggesting you consider my offer," Carson said smoothly. $5,000 for the Broken Arrow Ranch. More money than you could spend in a lifetime, and you'd be free to go back east where it's safe. "I already told you, this ranch is not for sale. But if your husband is dead, he's not dead." "Elena," the third man spoke up, and Jake recognized the voice of Tom Barrett, one of Carson's known associates. "Be reasonable. You can't run this place alone and without Jake to protect you." Jake had heard enough. These weren't protectors Elena had hired. They were vultures, circling while they thought he was dead or missing. And they'd clearly been pressuring his wife to sell the ranch. He circled back to the front door, took a deep breath to steady himself despite his injuries, and walked in like he owned the place. Because he did. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Jake said calmly, his rifle held low but ready. "I believe you're sitting at my table." The three men jumped up so fast that Carson knocked over his coffee cup. Elena's face lit up with relief and joy that made Jake's heart skip. "Jake," she started toward him, then stopped as she noticed the blood on his shirt and the careful way he was moving. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Jake said, his eyes never leaving the three men. "Just a few scratches. Carson, Barrett, what brings you to my ranch?" "Sullivan." Carson recovered his composure quickly. "We heard about the Apache trouble. Came to check on your wife while you were away. Good neighbors looking out for each other." "How thoughtful," Jake said dryly. "And the third gentleman?" "Frank Morrison, Mr. Sullivan," the man said nervously. "I work for Mr. Carson." "I see. And what exactly were you discussing with my wife?" Elena stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Mr. Carson has been very persistent about making an offer for our ranch. He seems to think that because you've been gone for 4 days, you must be dead, and I should sell immediately." Jake felt cold fury building in his chest. "That Anya so." "Now, Sullivan," Carson said hastily, "no need to get upset. We were just looking out for Elena's interest. A woman alone in Apache territory." "My wife," Jake said quietly, "is not alone, and she's perfectly capable of making her own decisions about unwanted visitors." The menace in his voice was unmistakable. Carson and his men suddenly seemed to remember that Jake Sullivan had survived 3 years of hunting Apache raiders, and that his reputation with weapons was well established. "Of course," Carson said, backing toward the door. "We were just leaving anyway. Elena, if you change your mind about our offer—" "She won't," Jake said flatly. After the three men left, Jake finally allowed himself to relax. Elena was immediately at his side, her hands gentle as she examined his injuries. "How bad?" she asked. "Nothing that won't heal." "Elena, how long have they been coming around?" "Carson showed up the day after you left. He's been back twice, always with different men, always pushing me to sell." Elena's hands were steady as she helped him out of his bloody shirt. But Jake could see the fear she'd been hiding. I was starting to think maybe you weren't coming back. I promised you I would. I know, I never doubted you, not really, but 4 days felt like forever. As Elena cleaned his wounds, Jake told her about Black Wolf, about the confrontation, about the Apache leader's knowledge of their marriage and the ranch. So we're safe now? Elena asked. From Black Wolf's band, yes, but Carson is a different kind of threat. He's not going to give up easily, especially now that he knows I'm alive and we're not selling. Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, Jake, while you were gone, I realized something. What? She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. This isn't just about a business arrangement anymore. At least not for me. Jake felt his heart start to race. Elena, I know we agreed to separate bedrooms, to take things slowly, but when I thought you might not come back, I realized that what I felt wasn't just gratitude or partnership. She took a deep breath. I was falling in love with you, and I hadn't even admitted it to myself. Jake stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Are you sure? I'm sure, Elena's voice was steady, confident. The question is, how do you feel about me? Jake reached up and touched her face gently, marveling at the softness of her skin, the trust in her eyes. I love you, he said simply. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you refused to sell your dying horse. I just didn't know if I had the right to feel that way. Why wouldn't you have the right? Because I'm damaged goods, Elena. Because I've got ghosts that will always be with me. Because loving me means sharing me with memories of Elena and Marcus. Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, Jake, I'm not asking you to forget your first family. They were part of making you the man I fell in love with. But there's room in your heart for both the past and the future, isn't there? Jake pulled her closer, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. With you, there's room for anything. When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like their careful, practical wedding kiss. This was a kiss full of promise and passion, the beginning of something real and lasting. What happened in the months that followed would prove that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with desperate escapes or dangerous quests, but with two broken people choosing to heal together. By autumn, the Broken Arrow Ranch had become the most prosperous spread in the territory. Elena's head for numbers transformed their bookkeeping, while her partnership with Jake in managing the cattle turned their operation into a model of efficiency. More importantly, their marriage had blossomed into something neither of them had dared to hope for. Remember when you told me this was just a business arrangement? Elena teased one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Jake pulled her closer against his side, marveling at how natural it felt to have her there. I remember thinking I was offering you security and getting a housekeeper out of the deal. Instead, you got a wife who challenges your every decision and insists on helping with the cattle roundup. Best deal I ever made. The threats that had brought them together had faded into memory. Carson had given up his pursuit of their ranch after Jake made it clear that any further harassment would be met with frontier justice. The Apache raiders had moved to other territories after Black Wolf's death, and Harrison Walsh's gambling debts had finally caught up with him. Last they'd heard, he was working in a San Francisco saloon to pay off his creditors. But the most miraculous change was in Jake himself. The haunted, isolated man who'd offered to save a dying horse had slowly emerged from his shell of grief. He still carried Elena and Marcus in his heart, but the pain no longer defined him. Instead, he'd learned to honor their memory by building something beautiful with Elena. Dr. Henley sent word he'll be passing through next month, Elena mentioned, studying a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. Good, I want him to meet you properly, and I want to thank him again. For saving Rosemary? For giving me the excuse to bring you home. Elena smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her still flat stomach. She'd been planning to tell Jake her news for days, waiting for the perfect moment. Jake, she said softly, what would you say if I told you that our family might be growing? Jake went very still beside her. Elena, are you? Dear Morrison confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. The thought of becoming a father again brought back memories of Marcus. But they were good memories now, the joy of holding his son, teaching him to ride, watching him grow. Are you happy? Elena asked, suddenly uncertain. Jake turned to face her fully, his dark eyes bright with unshed tears. Happy, Elena, I never thought I'd have this chance again. To be a father, to watch our child grow up in this place we've built together. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. I'm more than happy. I'm grateful. That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom they now shared, Elena traced lazy patterns on Jake's chest and thought about the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rosemary hadn't gotten sick? She asked. Every day, Jake admitted. I think about how close I came to riding past you that morning. How different everything would be if I'd minded my own business. Maybe it was meant to happen this way. Maybe the universe really does conspire to put people where they need to be. Maybe, Jake agreed. Or maybe we just got lucky. Either way, I'm grateful. As autumn turned to winter, their contentment was tested by the usual challenges of frontier life. Harsh weather, difficult cattle, the isolation that came with ranch living. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthened by the love that had grown between them. When their daughter was born the following spring, Jake held her with the same gentle hands that had once saved a dying horse. They named her Elena Rose. Elena for Jake's first wife, Rose for the hope that had bloomed between them. She has your eyes, Elena murmured from the bed, exhausted but radiant. And your stubborn chin, Jake replied, completely besotted with the tiny creature in his arms. Mrs. Chen, now officially the baby's honorary grandmother, bustled around preparing meals and offering advice. Rosemary, fully recovered and thriving, seemed to understand the importance of the new arrival and stood sentinel in the pasture closest to the house. As Jake watched his new daughter sleep, he thought about the words he'd spoken to Elena that first day. Sometimes things are worth saving. He'd been talking about a dying horse, but the universe had given him something far more precious. A second chance at love, at family, at happiness. The Broken Arrow Ranch was no longer a monument to loss, but a celebration of hope. And when Elena Rose was old enough, he would tell her the story of how her parents met, how her mother's courage and her father's compassion had saved more than just a dying horse. They had saved each other. Years later, visitors to Redemption Creek would point out the Broken Arrow Ranch as an example of what could be built in the wilderness with hard work and determination. But Jake and Elena knew the real secret of their success had nothing to do with cattle or land or business sense. It had everything to do with two broken people who'd learned that sometimes the best way to heal is to give someone else a reason to hope. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the Wild West. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, I'd be absolutely thrilled if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means everything to creators like me. Drop a comment below and let me know which moment in Jake and Elena's story moved you the most. I love hearing from you wonderful people. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.